Audrey had always believed in the power of words. As a librarian in the quaint town of Millbrook, she spent her days surrounded by stories of adventure, romance, and transformation. But her own life felt like a book left unopened, its pages yearning to be turned. That was until Leo walked through the library doors on a crisp autumn morning, his presence as unexpected as a plot twist in a well-worn novel. Leo wasn't from Millbrook. His city clothes and confident stride marked him as an outsider in their close-knit community. Audrey watched from behind the circulation desk as he wandered through the aisles, his fingers trailing along the spines of books, pausing occasionally to pull one out and leaf through its pages. "Can I help you find anything?" Audrey asked, her voice barely above a whisper, mindful of the library's hushed atmosphere. Leo turned, and Audrey felt her breath catch. His eyes were a striking shade of green, reminiscent of the lush forest that surrounded Millbrook. "I'm looking for inspiration," he said with a smile that made Audrey's heart skip a beat. "Inspiration for what?" she inquired, intrigued. "For my next novel," Leo replied. "I'm a writer, you see. I've come to Millbrook to finish my latest book, but I seem to have hit a wall." Audrey's eyes widened. A real author here in her library. She'd always dreamed of writing her own stories, but had never found the courage to put pen to paper. "What kind of books do you write?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "Romance, mostly," Leo admitted, a hint of colour rising to his cheeks. "But I'm struggling with my current project. I can't seem to capture the essence of true love." Audrey nodded sympathetically. "Well, you've come to the right place. We have an extensive collection of romance novels. Perhaps reading some classics might help spark your creativity." Leo's eyes lit up. "That's a great idea. Would you mind showing me where to start?" For the next hour, Audrey guided Leo through the romance section, pulling out her favourite titles and discussing the merits of different authors. As they talked, she found herself drawn to his passion for storytelling and his genuine interest in her opinions. "You know," Leo said as they were shelving the last of the books they'd discussed, "you have a real knack for this. Have you ever considered writing yourself?" Audrey felt her cheeks grow warm. "Oh no. I mean, I've thought about it, but I wouldn't know where to begin." Leo's gaze softened. "Sometimes the hardest part is just starting. Why don't we meet for coffee tomorrow? I could give you some tips if you'd like." Audrey hesitated. She wasn't in the habit of meeting strangers for coffee, especially handsome, charming strangers who made her pulse race. But there was something about Leo that made her want to take a chance. "All right," she agreed. "There's a little cafe just down the street. Shall we say 10 a.m? Leo's smile was radiant. "It's a date." As Audrey watched him leave the library, she couldn't help but feel that a new chapter in her life was about to begin. The next morning, Audrey found herself standing in front of her closet, agonizing over what to wear. She finally settled on a soft blue sweater that brought out the colour of her eyes and a pair of comfortable jeans. As she walked to the cafe, she tried to calm her nerves. "It's not a real date," she reminded herself. "Just two people talking about writing." Leo was already there when she arrived, seated at a cosy table by the window. He stood up as she approached, pulling out a chair for her. "Good morning, Audrey," he said warmly. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering you a latte. The barista said it was your usual." Audrey was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you. That's perfect." As they sipped their coffee, Leo began to share his writing process, offering tips on character development and plot structure. Audrey listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes in a small notebook she'd brought along. "But the most important thing," Leo said, leaning in closer, "is to write from the heart. The best stories come from a place of truth and authenticity." Audrey nodded, feeling a spark of inspiration. "I think I understand. It's about tapping into your own experiences and emotions, isn't it?" Leo's eyes lit up. "Exactly. You're a natural, Audrey. I have a feeling you have a beautiful story inside you, just waiting to be told." As they continued to talk, the hours slipped by unnoticed. It wasn't until the cafe owner came to inform them that they were closing that Audrey realised how long they'd been there. "Oh my," she exclaimed, glancing at her watch. "I can't believe it's been 4 hours." Leo looked equally surprised. "Time flies when you're in good company," he said with a wink. Would you like to continue our discussion over dinner? Audrey hesitated for a moment, but the thought of parting ways with Leo so soon made her heart ache. I'd love to, she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. They found a charming Italian restaurant just a few blocks away. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, their conversation flowed effortlessly from books to travel to their hopes and dreams. Audrey found herself opening up to Leo in a way she never had with anyone before. You know, Leo said as they were finishing their tiramisu, I think I've found my inspiration. Audrey tilted her head, curious. Oh, for your book? Leo nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Yes, but not just for the book. For life, for love. Audrey, I know we've only just met, but I feel like I've known you forever. Would you consider having dinner with me again tomorrow night? Audrey's heart soared. I'd love to, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As they walked back to Audrey's apartment, Leo reached for her hand. His touch sent a shiver down her spine, and she marvelled at how natural it felt to have her fingers intertwined with his. At her doorstep, Leo hesitated for a moment before leaning in to place a soft kiss on her cheek. Good night, Audrey, he murmured. Sweet dreams. Audrey watched him walk away, her hand touching the spot where his lips had been. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Over the next few weeks, Audrey and Leo's relationship blossomed like a flower in spring. They spent their days exploring Millbrook together, discovering hidden trails in the forest and quaint shops in the town square. In the evenings, they would often sit in the library after hours, Leo working on his novel while Audrey tentatively began to write her own story. One night, as they were walking hand in hand under a canopy of stars, Leo turned to Audrey with a serious expression. Audrey, there's something I need to tell you. Audrey's heart skipped a beat. What is it? Leo took a deep breath. My publisher called today. They want me back in New York next week for meetings about the book. Audrey felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. Oh, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. How long will you be gone? Leo's eyes were filled with sadness. That's the thing. They want me to stay, permanently. They're offering me a big contract, but it would mean relocating to the city. Audrey felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She'd known this day would come eventually, but she hadn't expected it to be so soon. I see, she said softly. Well, that's wonderful news. You should be very proud. Leo cupped her face in his hands. Audrey, I don't want to leave you. These past few weeks have been the happiest of my life. I think I'm falling in love with you. Audrey's heart soared at his words even as it broke. Oh, Leo, she whispered, I think I'm falling in love with you too, but I can't ask you to give up your dream for me. Leo pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. You are my dream, Audrey. The book, the contract, none of it means anything without you. They stood there in silence for a long moment, holding each other under the vast expanse of the night sky. Finally, Audrey spoke. We'll figure it out, she said, her voice filled with determination. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. The week before Leo's departure flew by in a blur of stolen moments and bittersweet embraces. On his last night in Millbrook, they sat on the library roof, a bottle of wine between them, watching the sun set over the town they'd both come to love. I have something for you, Leo said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. I want you to have this. It's where I've been writing my story, our story. Audrey took the notebook with trembling hands. Leo, I can't accept this. Your writing is private. Leo shook his head. Not this. This belongs to both of us, and I want you to finish it. Audrey looked at him confused. Finish it? But it's your story. Leo smiled softly. It's our story, Audrey, and only you can write the ending. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Leo pulled Audrey close and kissed her with a passion that took her breath away. In that moment, Audrey knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, their love story was far from over. The months that followed Leo's departure were the hardest of Audrey's life. She threw herself into her work at the library, spending long hours reorganizing shelves and planning community events. At night, she would curl up in bed with Leo's notebook, reading his words over and over again, tracing her fingers over the indentations his pen had left on the paper. They spoke on the phone every day, but it wasn't the same as having him there beside her. Audrey found herself struggling to write. The words that had once flowed so easily now stuck somewhere between her heart and her pen. As winter settled over Millbrook, blanketing the town in a soft layer of snow, Audrey received an unexpected package in the mail. Inside was a beautiful fountain pen and a note from Leo. "For when inspiration strikes, I believe in you." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Audrey decided to take the pen and notebook to her favourite spot in the library, a cosy window seat overlooking the town square. As she sat there, watching the snowflakes dance in the air, she felt a familiar stirring in her heart. Slowly, hesitantly, she began to write. At first, the words came in fits and starts, but soon they were flowing from her pen like a river breaking through a dam. She wrote about love and loss, about the pain of separation and the hope of reunion. She wrote about Leo, about the way his smile lit up a room, and how his touch made her feel alive. And as she wrote, she felt closer to him than she had in months. Meanwhile, in New York, Leo was struggling with his own demons. The big city, once a source of excitement and opportunity, now felt cold and impersonal. He missed the quiet charm of Millbrook, the friendly faces at the cafe, and most of all, he missed Audrey. His editor was growing increasingly frustrated with his lack of progress on the new book. "What happened to that spark you had when you first came back?" she demanded during one particularly tense meeting. Leo sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I left it behind in Millbrook," he admitted. The editor's expression softened. "This girl you met, she must be pretty special." Leo nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "She's everything." That night, as Leo lay in bed staring at the ceiling of his cramped apartment, he made a decision. He couldn't keep living like this, torn between two worlds. He needed to follow his heart. Back in Millbrook, Audrey was putting the finishing touches on her story. She'd been writing for weeks, pouring her heart and soul onto the pages of Leo's notebook. As she wrote the final word, she felt a sense of accomplishment, unlike anything she'd ever experienced before. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone and dialed Leo's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Leo," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "I did it. I finished our story. I miss you. I love you. Please come home." As she ended the call, Audrey heard a commotion outside. Curious, she went to the window and peered out into the snowy night. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw a familiar figure trudging through the snow, a suitcase in hand. Without bothering to grab a coat, Audrey raced down the stairs and out into the cold. "Leo!" she cried, running towards him. Leo dropped his suitcase and opened his arms just in time to catch Audrey as she flung herself at him. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair. "I'm home," he whispered. "For good this time, if you'll have me." Audrey pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "What about your contract? Your career in New York?" Leo shook his head. "None of it matters without you. I talked to my publisher. They've agreed to let me work remotely. I can write from anywhere as long as I'm with you." Tears of joy streamed down Audrey's face as she pulled Leo in for a passionate kiss. As their lips met, the world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, reunited at last. Later that night, as they sat curled up together on Audrey's couch, Leo noticed the notebook on the coffee table. "You finished it?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. Audrey nodded, suddenly shy. "Would you like to read it?" Leo's eyes lit up. "I'd love to." As Leo read, Audrey watched his face, her heart pounding. When he finally looked up, his eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Audrey," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is beautiful. You're an incredible writer." Audrey blushed, ducking her head. "I had a good teacher." Leo set the notebook aside and pulled Audrey into his arms. "We make a pretty good team, don't we?" he murmured against her hair. Audrey nodded, snuggling closer. "The best." As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, Audrey realised that their story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. With Leo by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges life might throw their way. The next morning, they woke to find Millbrook transformed into a winter wonderland. Hand in hand, they walked through the snow-covered streets, marvelling at the beauty around them. "You know," Leo said as they paused to admire an particularly elaborate snowman, "I think I've finally figured out what true love is." Audrey looked up at him, curious. "Oh? And what's that?" Leo smiled, pulling her close. "It's this. It's us. It's choosing each other every day, through the good times and the bad. It's building a life together, one moment at a time." Audrey felt her heart swell with love. "I couldn't agree more," she said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. As they continued their walk, Audrey's mind wandered to the future. She thought about the stories they would write together, both on paper and in their lives. She thought about lazy Sunday mornings and cozy nights by the fire. She thought about the family they might one day have and the adventures that lay ahead. But most of all, she thought about how lucky she was to have found her own real-life romance, one that rivaled any story she'd ever read in her beloved library. That evening, as they sat in the library after hours, Leo working on his latest chapter, while Audrey brainstormed ideas for her next story, she realized something important. Love wasn't just about grand gestures or passionate declarations. It was about moments like this, quiet, ordinary moments filled with companionship and understanding. "Leo," she said softly, not wanting to break the peaceful atmosphere. He looked up from his laptop, his eyes warm and attentive. "Yes, love?" Audrey's heart fluttered at the endearment. "Thank you for coming back to me, for choosing us." Leo's smile was tender as he reached across the table to take her hand. "Audrey, I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here for you. We'll face this together." Audrey felt tears welling up in her eyes, overwhelmed by Leo's unwavering support. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "I don't know what I'd do without you." As the days passed, Audrey and Leo worked on rebuilding their relationship. They attended couples therapy, learning to communicate more openly and honestly with each other. Slowly but surely, trust began to grow between them once again. One evening, as they sat on their balcony watching the sunset, Leo turned to Audrey with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice soft but determined. "I know we've been through a lot, but I believe in us. I believe in our love." Audrey's heart raced, unsure of where Leo was going with this. "What are you saying, Leo?" He took a deep breath, reaching into his pocket. "I'm saying that I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Audrey. Will you marry me?" He produced a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a beautiful diamond ring. Audrey gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears of joy spilled down her cheeks as she nodded vigorously. "Yes, Leo. Yes, I'll marry you." Leo slipped the ring onto her finger, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. As they embraced, Audrey felt a sense of peace wash over her. They had weathered the storm together, and their love had emerged stronger for it. The following months were a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Audrey threw herself into planning, grateful for the distraction from the lingering guilt she still felt over what had happened with Leo's father. She was determined to make their wedding day perfect, a symbol of their renewed commitment to each other. As the big day approached, Audrey found herself growing increasingly nervous. Not about marrying Leo, she was certain about that, but about facing his family again. She hadn't seen Leo's father since the incident at the farm, and the thought of encountering him at the wedding filled her with dread. The night before the wedding, as Audrey lay awake in bed, her mind racing with anxiety, she felt Leo stir beside her. "Can't sleep," he murmured, pulling her close. Audrey sighed, nestling into his embrace. "I'm just worried about tomorrow, about seeing your father." Leo was quiet for a moment, his hand tracing soothing circles on her back. "I know it's going to be difficult," he said finally, "but remember, we're in this together. I'll be right by your side the whole time." His words calmed her, and Audrey felt herself relaxing into sleep. Whatever happened tomorrow, she and Leo would face it as a team. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn morning. As Audrey stood in front of the mirror in her bridal suite, adjusting her veil, she felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Her best friend and maid of honour, Sarah, bustled around her, fussing with the train of her dress. "You look absolutely stunning," Sarah gushed, stepping back to admire Audrey. "Leo is going to be speechless when he sees you." Audrey smiled, smoothing down the front of her gown. It was a simple, elegant design that hugged her curves before flowing out into a modest train. She had chosen it because it reminded her of the dresses in the romance novels she loved so much. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "It's time," her father called from the other side. Taking a deep breath, Audrey picked up her bouquet and prepared to make her way to the ceremony. As she walked down the aisle, her eyes locked with Leo's, and suddenly all her worries melted away. The love shining in his eyes was all that mattered. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with heartfelt vows and tender moments. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Leo pulled Audrey into a passionate kiss, eliciting cheers and applause from their guests. At the reception, Audrey found herself swept up in a whirlwind of congratulations and well wishes. She was so caught up in the joy of the moment that she almost didn't notice when Leo's father approached them. "Congratulations," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. "I'm happy for you both." Audrey felt Leo tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Thank you," she replied, meeting her father-in-law's gaze steadily. "We're glad you could be here." The moment passed, and soon they were pulled away by other guests wanting to offer their congratulations. As the night wore on, Audrey found herself relaxing more and more, enjoying the celebration of their love. Later, as she and Leo swayed together on the dance floor, she rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you," she murmured. "Thank you for believing in us, even when things were tough." Leo pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "I'll always believe in us, Audrey. You're my soulmate, my partner in everything. Whatever life throws our way, we'll face it together." As they continued to dance, surrounded by their loved ones, Audrey felt a sense of peace settle over her. She and Leo had overcome so much to get to this point, and she knew that together they could handle anything the future might bring. The weeks following their wedding were like something out of a dream. Leo and Audrey embarked on a romantic honeymoon to Italy, exploring ancient ruins in Rome, floating down canals in Venice, and savouring exquisite wines in Tuscany. Away from the pressures of their everyday lives, they were able to focus solely on each other, strengthening their bond and creating memories that would last a lifetime. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their hotel room in Florence, watching the sun set over the Arno River, Leo turned to Audrey with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he began, "I've been thinking about our future." Audrey raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, what about it?" Leo took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Well, I know we've talked about it before, but I think I'm ready to start a family. What do you think about trying for a baby?" Audrey's heart skipped a beat. They had discussed having children before, but always as a distant possibility. Now, faced with the reality of it, she felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "Are you sure we're ready?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's such a big step." Leo nodded, his eyes shining with certainty. "I know it's a huge responsibility, but I can't think of anyone I'd rather take this journey with than you. We've been through so much together, Audrey. I think we're ready for this next adventure." As Audrey considered his words, she felt a warmth spreading through her chest. The idea of creating a family with Leo, of nurturing a life that was a perfect blend of both of them, filled her with joy. "Okay," she said finally, a smile spreading across her face. "Let's do it. Let's start a family." Leo's face lit up with happiness, and he pulled her into a passionate kiss. As they embraced, Audrey felt a sense of excitement for the future they were building together. Upon returning home from their honeymoon, Audrey and Leo threw themselves into preparing for this new chapter in their lives. They began researching everything they could about pregnancy and parenting. Their evenings often spent curled up together on the couch, poring over books and websites. Months passed, and despite their best efforts, Audrey didn't become pregnant. At first they tried to stay positive, reminding each other that these things could take time. But as more time went by without success, Audrey began to worry. "What if something's wrong with me?" she confided in Leo one night, tears of frustration streaming down her face. What if I can't give you the family you want? Leo gathered her into his arms, holding her close. Hey, don't talk like that, he murmured soothingly. We're in this together, remember? If there's an issue, we'll face it together and find a solution. And if we can't have biological children, there are other ways to build a family. What matters is that we have each other. His unwavering support gave Audrey strength, and she resolved to stay positive. They decided to consult with a fertility specialist, hoping to get some answers and guidance. The day of their appointment arrived, and Audrey felt a mix of nervousness and hope as they sat in the doctor's office, waiting for the results of their tests. When the doctor finally entered, her expression was serious but not unkind. Mr. and Mrs. Hartley, she began, I've reviewed your test results, and I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Audrey felt her heart sink, her hand instinctively tightening around Leo's. The doctor continued, explaining that Audrey had a condition that made it extremely unlikely for her to conceive naturally. The words washed over her like a tidal wave, leaving her feeling numb and devastated. As they left the clinic, Audrey felt as if her world had been turned upside down. All her dreams of carrying Leo's child, of feeling a life grow inside her, seemed to crumble around her. She was quiet on the drive home, lost in her thoughts and fears. Leo, sensing her distress, suggested they take a walk in the park near their home. As they strolled hand in hand along the tree-lined paths, he finally broke the silence. Audrey, he said gently, I know this isn't the news we were hoping for, but I want you to know that it doesn't change anything for me. I love you, and I still want to build a family with you, however we can do that. Audrey looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. But what if we can't? What if we're never able to have children? Leo stopped walking and turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. Then we'll still have each other, and that's more than enough. We can explore other options. Adoption, surrogacy. Or if we decide not to have children at all, that's okay too. As long as I have you by my side, I have everything I need. His words touched something deep inside Audrey, and she felt a wave of love and gratitude wash over her. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his embrace. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you. As they continued their walk, Audrey felt a glimmer of hope returning. Yes, their path to parenthood might be more complicated than they had initially imagined, but with Leo by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Over the next few weeks, Audrey and Leo spent a lot of time discussing their options. They researched adoption agencies, looked into surrogacy, and even considered fostering. Each option had its own set of challenges and uncertainties, but they were determined to find a way to build the family they both longed for. One evening, as they were going through some adoption brochures, Audrey had an idea. You know, she said hesitantly, I've been thinking about something. Leo looked up from the papers he was reading, giving her his full attention. What is it, love? Audrey took a deep breath before continuing. Well, I was thinking about the library and all the children who come in for story time. So many of them are from the local orphanage, and they always seem so eager for attention and affection. Leo nodded, encouraging her to go on. What if we looked into adopting an older child? Audrey suggested. There are so many kids out there who need a loving home, and we have so much love to give. Leo was quiet for a moment, considering her words. Then a slow smile spread across his face. Audrey, that's a wonderful idea. I think we could make a real difference in a child's life. Excited by the possibility, they began researching the process of adopting an older child. They attended information sessions, spoke with social workers, and prepared their home for the home study process. Months passed, filled with paperwork, interviews, and anxious waiting. Finally, they received the call they had been hoping for. There was a 10-year-old girl named Sophie who needed a home, and the agency thought they might be a good match. The day they met, Sophie was one Audrey would never forget. The little girl was shy at first, her big brown eyes wary as she took in her potential new parents. But as they spent time together, playing board games and sharing stories, Sophie began to open up. By the end of the visit, Sophie was laughing at Leo's silly jokes and asking Audrey about all the books in the library. As they prepared to leave, Sophie surprised them both by giving them each a tight hug. "Will you come back?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. Audrey felt her heart swell with love for this brave, beautiful child. "Of course we will," she promised. "We'll be back very soon." As they drove home that evening, Audrey and Leo knew without a doubt that they wanted to make Sophie a part of their family. The adoption process wasn't easy, and there were many challenges along the way, but they faced each one together, their love for each other and for Sophie giving them strength. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of waiting, the day arrived when they could bring Sophie home. As they walked into their house, Sophie clutching tightly to both their hands, Audrey felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. That night, after tucking Sophie into her new bed and reading her a bedtime story, Audrey and Leo stood in the doorway of her room, watching their daughter sleep peacefully. "We did it," Audrey whispered, leaning into Leo's embrace. "We're a family." Leo pressed a kiss to her temple. "We are," he agreed, "and it's more wonderful than I ever could have imagined." As they closed Sophie's door and headed to their own room, Audrey reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. There had been challenges and heartaches along the way, but every step had led them here, to this moment of pure joy and love. She knew that there would be more challenges ahead as they navigated parenthood and continued to grow as a family. But with Leo by her side and Sophie in their lives, Audrey felt ready for anything. Their love story had taken an unexpected turn, but it was more beautiful and fulfilling than she ever could have dreamed. As they lay in bed that night, listening to the soft sounds of their daughter sleeping down the hall, Audrey turned to Leo with a smile. "I love you," she whispered. "Thank you for this amazing life we've built together." Leo pulled her close, his voice filled with emotion as he replied, "I love you too, Audrey, always and forever." And as they drifted off to sleep, Audrey knew that this was just the beginning of their greatest adventure yet.